إني ألقى الإيناس في صومي وصلاتي ودعائي للرحمن وجميع الطاعات.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to a very, very important episode where I'm joined by two very, very important people. On my right is Dr. Ayman. How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah, how are you?
You good? Alhamdulillah. You've been in one of my videos where I was exposed before.
Yeah.
Yes?
It was a fun video, man.
It was a fun video.
Yeah, it was good.
Now we're getting down to the academic nitty gritty. Yeah? Okay. And obviously, the one and only Sheikh Abu Safiya. How you doing? You okay? Alhamdulillah.
I'm good, man.
Okay. And if you don't know these guys to my right and left, they've undertook, mashallah, a very high research. And what we try and do for you guys, obviously, is try and get people who've done the research to come in and share the research with you. Why I've brought Dr. Ayman today is because we are going to talk about a very important topic, which is the topic of embryology and comparing it with the Quranic discourse and scientific discourse. Dr. Ayman, obviously, this is his kind of area of speciality or expertise, because that's what you studied kind of in university, isn't it?
Along those lines.
Along those lines, yeah, right. And on my left side, obviously, the theological side is Abu Safiya, who's done the bahth and stuff like that. Graduated from Medina University and has got the tools and the know-how to be able to extrapolate from the Islamic text. So we're joined by two individuals who are well qualified. To proceed, I just want to make a point before we continue, because I think there is a feeling, Abu Safiya, of people feeling that we have anything against Dr. Zakir Naik. We don't have absolutely anything. In fact, we actually in many different ways we have a great respect for him.
We're absolutely nothing but respect and ihtiram, taqdeer. We respect him.
Yes.
He's done a lot of work for the ummah, a lot of da'wah, alhamdulillah. But of course the issue is the issue that kullun yu'khadh minhu yurad. Everyone is taken from and rejected upon. So Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala said, illa sahib hadha al-qabr, and he pointed to the grave of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, except for him.
Yes.
So the issue is not an issue of personalities. The issue is an issue of the haqq and what we believe to be the truth. And if you look over the discourse, the Islamic discourse, over our quite alhamdulillah dignified heritage, you find this amongst everyone.
Exactly. And
it doesn't mean that we're reducing from the status of a person.
Of course not. Yeah. And we have acquaintances who are loosely connected to the IRF, loosely connected to Peace TV and stuff like that. So if and I'll make this very public, if anyone comes forward to us and sends an email and says, look, or if Dr. Zakir Naik himself comes forward and says, we don't like using our name or our pictures, we will change the marketing completely so that the videos don't contain his name in it. We only use his name because people need to be familiar with the kind of academic discourse we're putting forward. It is in fact a review of his work, but it's not to say that it's a refutation of his work or of him at all. We're not trying to necessarily do that. Him as a person, we love him. In fact, he's done such great work for the ummah. What we're doing is like a drop in the ocean compared to what he's done. Let's be frank. I mean, he's one of the most influential figures, no doubt.
I grew up watching his lectures and his videos.
Same here, no doubt. Wallahi, same here when I was younger. I grew up watching his stuff as well and stuff. But no doubt, as we say, as Al-Dhahabi said to Ibn Taymiyyah, the haqq is more beloved to us than he said the haqq is more beloved to us than Ibn Taymiyyah. So the point is, and he was his student. So if we consider ourselves students of Dr. Zakir, then obviously we love and respect him so highly, but the haqq is more beloved to us than himself or than anyone else. Now, to move forward, let's start with the stages of embryonic development as per the Quranic discourse. Okay, the Quran talks about different stages of embryonic development. There has been an attempt from both parties by people that are trying to promote Islam as to make it scientific friendly or science friendly, and those who are trying to say it's contradictory to science, to kind of contrive either scientific miracles or scientific errors into the Quranic discourse. Before we continue, Dr. Ayman, give us I know we've had this conversation before off air, and we've discussed about, it's a lot of what you're about to tell us has a terminological jargon. Try and reduce the terminological jargon so as to tell us exactly what happens from what we know today of science. It's not to say it's going to be set in stone. It's not to say it's perfect knowledge. It's not to say there's no problems of induction. But from your studies, what do we know about the fertilization process, for example?
Bismillah. In terms of what happens right at the beginning of what we call conception, obviously what happens first is that the semen is ejaculated. The semen is what contains the sperm. It's made up of sperm plus a lot of other things which contain the nutrients for the sperm and allow it to survive. The semen exits and it moves along, and basically the sperm within the semen meets with the egg. One sperm fertilizes one egg, and there's many sperm cells. And once that happens, you start to have different stages of embryonic development which occur. And once that occurs, you get sort of a continuum of different stages, which are based upon sort of three what we call germ layers: endoderm, mesoderm, and ectoderm, which develop into the various tissues of the body: bones, muscles, the various organs, blood, etc. So that's it in a nutshell. And then after that, it gets a lot more complicated as more complex processes start to happen. Hormones are released which signal for different timings of different body part development. So that's, in a nutshell, that's how it really goes.
In terms of, for the layman audience, is there a difference, between semen and sperm, and what is that difference if there is one?
The difference between semen and sperm is that the semen is what contains the sperm. The sperm is actually the cell which is involved in the fertilization of the egg. But the semen is the medium within which the sperm moves. And it's also what contains the nutrients for the sperm. If you imagine the sperm is it's a cell, in order for the cell to survive, it needs nutrients, and the semen contains some of what allows for the sperm to survive and also move around as well.
Okay. Now, thank you very much. We'll come back to you because we will need your expertise for more time. What we're going to do now is talk about the stages of embryonic development as per the Quranic discourse. So let's start with what the Quran talks about. And obviously there are two sets of ayat which can be found in Surah Al-Hajj and Surah Al-Mu'minun, which are probably most explicit in the embryonic development format. The first thing that is mentioned in either of those surahs is nutfa. Sometimes turab is mentioned before, which is like soil or teen is sometimes mentioned, whatever. But generally speaking, in terms of an embryonic discourse, the first thing that is mentioned is nutfa. So what is a nutfa? Okay, give us some information about the nutfa. Give us, from the tafsiri perspective, from the lughawi perspective, what we know about nutfa.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalam ala rasulullah. طيب, nutfa generally it means stated in the tafsir of Imam al-Qurtubi rahimahullah ta'ala, also Imam al-Baghawi and others, that it refers to many. It refers to sperm. And it was called nutfa due to its qillah, due to it being quite small in number. Some of them say qalilun min al-ma', it's something quite small from water, and it could also refer to something quite large as well at the same time. So generally the gist of nutfa is that it refers to something that is small. Okay, nutfa, something that is small, and you have many examples of this in the Arabic language. Another thing that we find, of course, nutfa itself is mentioned in roughly 12 ayat in the Quran, right? Not just restricted to the ayat in Hajj and Mu'minun, but other roughly 12 ayat. We find also another ayah that talks about something called sulala, okay, which we spoke about before. Sulala is in Surah Mu'minun. Now, what does sulala refer to? It's generally translated as
an extract or something.
Extract, something that has extraction. And this is correct because in the Arabic language generally, Al-Baghawi rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentioned in his tafsir, in fact he quotes to Ibn Abbas from the Sahaba radiyallahu anhuma, and he says that it means sulala safwatul ma', it means something that is pure water. But not only that, but sulal in the Arabic language also means something that emerges and is secreted. Okay, and you find evidence from this in the Arabic language, in pre-Islamic poetry, as well in Islamic non-Islamic proverbs before Islam as well, such as فَسُلِّ ثِيَابِ مِنْ ثِيَابِكَ تَنْسُلِ, which refers to clothes being taking off slowly. Okay, and you find also shi'r, poetry from Hassan ibn Thabit and others. So this is the meaning.
Some have said that sulala, some have said that sulala means it basically means a small part of a whole.
Quran says in Surah Sajda chapter 32 verse number 8, we have created the human beings from sulala. That means the best part of a whole. The one sperm which fertilizes the ova, out of the millions of sperm, the Quran refers to as sulala, best part of the whole.
Is there any basis for that in the Quran?
Generally in the Arabic language, if you go to Lisan al-Arab, Ibn Mandur, and you go to Mukhtar Sihah and other quite famous classical Arabic language dictionaries, lexicons, you will not find this meaning. And nor, to my knowledge, have any of the Mufassirun referred to something sulala as meaning this.
There's 2 ayat in the Quran that I'm aware of. With the one that's probably most explicit is one Surah Al-Sajdah. So it says, ثُمَّ جَعَلَ نَسْلَهُ مِن مَاءٍ مِّن مَاءٍ مَهِينٍ. Yeah. So here the ayah is talking about his nesl, his
progeny.
His progeny.
Yeah.
So here, how do we interpret this ayah?
It would be that, and Allah Jalla wa Ala knows best, that sulala here is referring to sperm mimma mahin. Now, of course, sulala, we said it means something that being emitted, but to say that it refers to something
just
small from the greater whole is something that's generally not found in the language. But you can say, and some of them have mentioned, that sulala can also be nutfa. It can also be referring back to nutfa, which is sperm. Okay, and sometimes sperm, it refers to a small part of a greater whole. We know that this meaning is found in the Arabic language. Right. So the two could be used interchangeably as well.
Excellent. Okay. So here we've gone through one important thing.
Could I add one thing on to that?
Yes, of course.
Would you say that we could say definitely that the nutfa could mean sperm, or is it more of a thing where we say it fits, it's the most appropriate thing, and this adds to the timeless nature of the Quran and the miracle of it, where the Arabs would have understood it as like, you came from something insignificant and look what you are now, and we can interpret it in that way, and also we can interpret it in the way that it can mean sperm. Would that be an appropriate tafsir, or is that something that wouldn't fit?
The word sperm aslan it's something that is hadith, it's something that is quite modern in scientific terminologies. Yeah? So of course, if you look at the Arab and how they understood the word nutfa, they would refer to it as ma' al-rajul, the water, the fluid of the male fluid. Okay, it's only our modern scientific that's told them that we've now added a name for this, but before that, this was not necessarily given a name per se. So of course, subhanAllah, it fits all times and all ages.
That's a good point.
Would you say you mentioned that obviously the times the Arabs, they would have said that the sperm is ma'ul rajul, but here the Quran is actually more specific. It's saying nutfa min or sulala min, so it's saying it's the part of something else, whereas you mentioned that the Arabs would have said ma'ul rajul, which is the whole, whereas the Quran is actually being more specific. It's saying a small part with nutfa, it's being a small part of the whole. Is that something significant, or is that how would you view that?
Allah Ta'ala a'lam, because of course, Allah Jalla wa Ala here is saying that yes, sulala, also you can say nutfa, and ma' al-rajul. So here we have something greater and something more specific from that. But I think back then, or possibly with the medical knowledge at the time, would they have interpreted this possible way? We don't have any sources that will tell us this. Allahu a'lam. So we can't definitively negate, nor can we definitively affirm.
Okay, that sounds very balanced, to be fair. Now moving on swiftly, because this is where it gets quite juicy actually. This is probably one of the biggest things that is being mentioned here. We talked about nutfa, and we sidelined that, or we kind of added to that the idea of sulala. But here I think where the discourse really goes around is the word alaqa.
Oh, yes.
So what does the word alaqa actually mean?
Alaqa, when you look in the Arabic language, it means literally something to hang on to something. And this was known in the time of the Arab, pre-Islamic,
so this is
post-Islamic.
Not a superimposition.
Absolutely not. It is something that was used in pre-Islamic poetry. It's something that was used in proverbs.
We call them mu'allaqat.
Al-Mu'allaqat, Imru Qais. These are famous, very famous, perhaps the most well-known pre-Islamic poetry that exists. And this word is mentioned to use
because they were hanged literally on the.
They were hanged literally on the Kaaba because of their beauty, and because of their deep meanings. Yeah. So this is something that refers to something that is hanging.
Yeah.
This is what alaqa means,
so
of course.
It's not. We're not trying to superimpose anything by saying
absolutely that. Absolutely not. No, Allah Jalla wa Ala mentions alaqa in 5 different ayat in the Quran. As for the meaning of it, طبعا the Mufassirun have differed somewhat, but generally it means that it's blood that is jamid, that is quite solidified. Yeah, a clot of blood, that's generally translated as, and I don't see a problem in this translation.
Good. Okay, so now the point is this: a lot of people say that when I look at tafsir, it says qit'atun min damin or whatever. It's a clot of blood or whatever. But the word alaqa, is it more comprehensive than that? Because if Allah wanted to say it was dam, He could have just said that. Because dam, there are words in Arabic for qit'a, or a qit'atun min damin or whatever. He could have just used that. So is there a significance of using the word alaqa?
I think this comes to Dr. Ayman.
Okay, what do you think?
Well, alaqa, I think what I was discussing with our Sheikh before, I think it's a tadabbur point rather than saying it can definitely means this. So it's sort of it's got multiple meanings that were appropriate at the time of the Arabs and can be appropriate up until now. So like you mentioned, alaqa can be like a blood clot. There's no problem saying that an embryo it looks like maybe like a clot of blood. Alaqa means it hangs as well. The embryo is something which obviously at that stage is clinging to the wall of the womb, so it's hanging in that stage. It's an alaqa as well. It's like a leech as well. Obviously the embryo at that stage is leeching off the mother's resources as well. Sometimes it's been translated like that as well. So I think I've heard
is the leech thing found in the mu'ajim?
To mean alaqa, Allah ta'ala a'lam. Allah ta'ala a'lam.
So sorry, continue. Yeah.
But yeah, so the point is that it's got multiple levels of meaning, which basically we can say the Quran has a timeless nature in that sense.
Yeah, I would agree with this. I mean, I think it's really interesting because we were talking before about the word janeen in Arabic, which it's mentioned in Surah Al-Najm, isn't it? In kuntum ajinatun fi butuni ummahatikum. Yeah, this ajinna, the mufrad of it is janeen. Like, there is a word in Arabic for fetus.
Yeah. Afwan, just sorry to get back to alaqa.
Yeah.
Yes, it is referred to leech as well in the Arabic language. Of course, it's referred to as a leech in the Arabic language. It's small. They refer it in the ma'ajim as
Dudat al-alaqa.
Dudat al-alaqa.
Yeah.
Like a worm, something else. Escaped me, subhanallah.
The point being here is that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just wanted to say that you were created from a fetus, there's a word for that in Arabic, and the Arabs knew it.
Yeah.
If he wanted to say that you were created from blood, there's a word from that in Arabic. But the word that he did choose, alaqa, is in fact multi-layered because it's not the conventional word the Arabs would use to describe a fetus.
Yeah.
It wasn't.
Yeah,
Which is, you could say, anomalous from the pre-Islamic poetry because people wouldn't speak in that way, alaqa. And that's the first thing.
Islamic existing kind of theories.
Yeah, like how people wouldn't speak like that. Yeah. So this is where actually, because of it, and we'll come to this afterwards, a lot of people say, well, this must have been copied. And this is where I feel like there is a case. I mean, a lot of people, the Orientalists, will see this probably is the most significant of all of the things that have been mentioned because it has the most academic weight behind it in terms of, well, the Arabs didn't use this before. It is quite interesting that it's talking about something like this. It has got those meanings which do relate to 21st century phenomena and is above and beyond the age of the Arabs, the 7th century discourse.
Absolutely.
So there's lots of those questions being asked now. Why is it like that? You know. But having said that, it's not. I think we'd all agree that it's not fair to say that okay, this is scientific miracle per se. We'll say that it's very interesting. These questions are incredibly interesting.
That's what I was saying about we can't say like definitely it means this. It would be more of a tadabbur point, if anything.
Which means in English?
Sorry, just a tadabbur is like pondering. It would be more of a pondering point, contemplation point, rather than saying it definitely means this. I think you'll run into problems if you try and say it means this.
But that's what we mentioned in the answer of these videos. That our approach to these is that we cannot definitively affirm that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala meant this in the Quran, even if science may indicate this. We of course discussed before with the video you did, the Sabur and others, that the whole issue of does scientific certainties exist or not, and scientific theory and paradigm shifts, etc., etc. But we can say it's possible. If the Arabic language allows us to, and the context of the verse allows us to interpret this, then it's possible we could say Allah did mean this, but we cannot definitively say that He meant this.
What's really, really interesting is that in the biblical discourse you don't find this.
Subhanallah.
Yeah, in the biblical discourse, in the book of Job, it's talking about it's talking about how the formation of man is completely from a 21st century perspective. And once again, we're not saying that's the be all and end all, but it's quite primitive. It's like it's curdled cheese and this kind of things. Like human being is made from like a cheese-like substance or kind of thing. So this kind of thing in the book of Job and others is nowhere near the correlated to science as much as the Quran is in the 21st century. Now that's not to say that science is true and it's the barometer, but it's just the reality. So and once again this goes to the kind of point that we were making in the beginning, if you do take science as somewhat of a as a good measure of truth, then the Quran will be the most closely correlated to science, and this is one of the examples, like a really ample example of that.
Really very good
Okay, so moving on, we talked about Alaqa. So what about mudghah?
Allah Jalla wa Ala, He mentions in the Quran mudghah roughly 3 times. He mentions it roughly 3 times, and many of the mufassirun, the scholars of tafsir, state that mudghah is or refers to lahma qalil, a small amount of flesh that is similar to that which is chewed. Okay, similar to that which is chewed. It's interesting because Allah in the Quran says mukhallaqa wa ghayr mukhallaqa. Now, here is where the difference of opinion amongst these scholars of tafsir happen. What does this mean? It's commonly translated as formed and unformed. Okay, Tabari rahimahullah ta'ala, he says it refers to, and he quotes that this goes back to Ibn Mas'ud from the companions, that it's a characteristic of the sperm, formed and unformed. A second opinion that it refers to complete and incomplete, and this was a view held by Qatada from the Tabi'in, the followers. Others have said that it means fashioned, formed and unformed, meaning aborted. This was held by Mujahid and others, and Tabari actually gives preference to this view, interestingly enough. But that generally sums up the whole difference of opinion in regards to what mudghah means.
What's really interesting about that is that some Orientalists try and claim that the Quranic discourse is borrowed from earlier, like Hellenistic, classical Greek theology and stuff like philosophy and stuff like that, and scientific theory. And if you look at probably the biggest heavyweight of the Hellenistic period, which is Aristotle, yeah, and his theories on human development, he first and foremost believed that menstruation and semen meet and create this kind of
it wasn't only held by him,
yeah,
it was held by others. I believe it was held by Galen as well, and a few others.
Galen had his own treatise that he wrote in 210 he died I think 210 AD. I don't think he believed the menstruation part.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think he believed in that, but he did have Galen is another person that which we'll come to in a second. He came before Aristotle. Yeah, but in the Hellenistic period, yeah. So this kind of theory of what is interesting about what Aristotle believed in is that he believed that the human being is not formed and unformed, and that the way that, and obviously this we can probably safely say this is against the scientific discourse of the 21st century and observable reality, that the baby is always one kind of shape and it just gets bigger and bigger. It's not how.
Within the sperm, I think it's depicted within the sperm itself.
Yeah.
I can. According to the 21st century knowledge of medicine, that's not how it works. We can say that.
So you see, it's really, really interesting how we can strike someone as big and heavy as Aristotle off with just one statement, just like that. No, seriously. But there's not something you can find from the Quranic perspective that you can just strike it and say that's completely wrong like that. And this shows you, I'm not trying to say that Islam and the Quran has to be in complete compliance with science, but what we are saying is that look how close it is. So Allah's making it accessible for everyone. You
could say that it's like strange for a book from that time period to have these kind of statements, or to be written in this kind of way.
Yes.
We can say that. Can we say that?
Yeah, I agree.
It has no precedent. Can we say that?
I would say that. I really would say that, because going back again to, I think the people that they say Hellenistic philosophers, but they also mention Galen, and we'll come to this because actually Zakir Naik has an incredible response to this, which we're going to inshallah react to. But he does kind of dismiss that in a really excellent way. To be fair to him, absolutely excellent.
I think he's one of the best actually who tackled this point.
He tackled this really well in his debate with William Campbell. With what I think was when I was younger and watching that debate, really, it was probably I've never seen anybody get humiliated like that. This guy humiliated. Seriously, he at one point he came up after Zakir Naik and he said, "Well," and this is exactly what he said. Dr. Zakir Naik has made some really asked some really hard questions, and I don't have any answers for those questions. And everyone started clapping.
Well, Dr. Naik has brought up some real problems. And there are these problems that he has said, and I don't deny them, and I don't have good answers for them. But I will tell about...
But the point being is that when you try and once again, it does indicate that the Bible, when it's compared to the Quran in light of the 21st century, it's discourse, scientific discourse, it can't be compared. It cannot be compared. Right? So once again, it's not accessible for the 21st century audience from a scientific perspective. Anyways, moving on. So we talked about alaqa, and we talked about mudghah. We talked about nutfa, mudgha, and alaqa.
Alaqa nutfa, alaqa mudghah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then after that comes idam, or the stage of the bones.
Right.
And then after that, clothing of the bones with flesh and the inception of the ruh.
Excellent, brilliant, perfect. Now, obviously, one of the Orientalist arguments is that, listen, we know that from scientific discourse, 21st century, that actually it's not necessary that the bones come before the muscle.
Okay.
Is this kind of what you've around? How does it all happen? How does it? What developed first? What's going on?
So the bone and the muscle, actually they develop from one of the 3 germ layers, we call them germ layers, which is called mesoderm. So it's one of the embryonic sort of early stage tissues, which later develops into certain body parts. So this certain germ layer, mesoderm, develops into the musculoskeletal system, so the muscles and the bones. In terms of what we know nowadays, in terms of our medical knowledge, we can't necessarily say that the bones all get formed and then the muscles and the flesh come after. It's sort of like a continuum. They happen in an integrated way, sort of together with each other. The bones, maybe a bit of bone, maybe a bit of flesh. More similar to that, rather than one happens and then the other one happens all in one go, one after the other.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So on the face of it, this would seem like this is flat in the face of the Quranic discourse, because it says ثُمَّ كَسَوْنَا الْعِظَامَ لَحْمًا. We have clothed the bones with flesh.
Yep.
But when we start looking, and this is really important now for the Quran learners that are watching this stuff, when you start looking at the Quran and then comparing it with the Sunnah, or getting the tafsir of the Sunnah to understand the Quran,
which is a Quranic methodology of tafsir.
You have to do
some
this.
of the ulama said, Al-Quran, as-Sunnah tufassir al-Quran wa tubayyinu. The Sunnah interprets the Quran and explains it, as
Right.
Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah mentioned.
Exactly. So if we do that, we start to realize that there are actually hadiths that give us more information
Yep.
about the embryonic development. They actually give us days. There are 2 or 3 hadiths we want to mention. There's obviously the Ibn Mas'ud hadith in Sahih Bukhari, which is also Nawawi's 40 hadith and whatnot. But that's also caveat. You can say that you could put that in line with, or it should be used in conjunction with another hadith.
I think what it is that these hadith, such as Imam Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala included in his compilation, is from the hadith of Ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu. Now Ibn Mas'ud, the hadith of Ibn Mas'ud, there are a number of narrations. Okay, there's a number of narrations of the hadith of Ibn Mas'ud. It isn't simply one narration and that's it.
Right.
Okay, so if, for example, if you look at the hadith again in
Tell them about the Bukhari one and then the Muslim one.
Yeah, so the hadith of Ibn Mas'ud that is agreed upon is mentioned in both Sahih Bukhari, the compilation of Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, and generally the most famous lafz, the most famous wording is that which is in Sahih al-Bukhari, which says إن أحدكم يجمع خلقه في بطن أمه 40 يوم نطفة ثم يكون علقة مثل ذلك, that the creation of one of you is joined together in the womb of his mother 40 days as a nutfa, sperm, and then it becomes, as it's translated, and then it becomes alaqa, which we just discussed the meaning of, just like this, and then mudgha, etc., etc. Now it's interesting to note that in Sahih Muslim, in this particular hadith, another narration is mentioned, and in fact they say that this narration is stronger than the other, and that it explains it, because in this particular narration, the same hadith, it says ثم يكون علقة في ذلك مثل ذلك, then it becomes a alaqa within the same 40 days as the sperm, and likewise the mudgha as well. So basically all of these things are happening within the 40 days. And it's interesting to note that there's another narration in Sahih Muslim as well, that from the hadith of Hudayfa, and it refers to 42 days, that after 42 days all of the creation kind of happens, the creation of the hearing, etc., fashioning of the bones and clothing of the flesh. It all happens simultaneously.
Right, and then there's something about male or female.
Male or female, yes. And then it's decided whether or not it is male or female.
Right.
In addition to when the angel is sent and the soul is breathed in.
This is really, really interesting, because here, obviously this has implications with fiqh, and we know that
Absolutely,
in the Hanbali
Yep.
madhab, abortion is not allowed before 40 days,
before 30 days.
30 days.
In the madhab.
Right, in the madhab. So they probably take...
And some of the ulama have said that it's completely not allowed, regardless of the time scale.
Yeah, so having said that, so this is definitely a scholarly opinion. Some of the Orientalists say, well, actually, this whole thing is not correct, because the tartib, or the chronology that's presenting the Quran, as we discussed from a scientific perspective, you got the bones first and then it says the meat afterwards. you've got the alaqa first, then you've got the mudgha afterwards, but we know that the alaqa continues because it continues clinging throughout.
Yep.
And what you're saying actually is that it doesn't necessarily mean that based on the second hadith, because it's all happening at the same time.
Absolutely, same. And even from the Arabic language perspective, we know that in the Quran it's mentioned thumma. And the word thumma is used quite often if you refer to Surah Hajj and Surah Mu'minun, describing the embryonic stages. And thumma generally means that something happens after something else, meaning there's a slight delay and then something else happens. So for example, if I say so and so entered the room thumma, and then another person entered it, it means that there was a slight time delay in between the first person entering it from the second person. But thumma could also mean, and this is a valid lugha, a valid language and valid interpretation of thumma as found amongst the Arab, the Arabians, that thumma could mean wow.
It can mean that.
It can mean wow, meaning something that happens without a time delay, meaning it happens at the same time.
I've seen that in Fakhruddin Razi's discussion of some ayat. I think.
Yeah, Tafsir al-Kabir. Yes, absolutely.
In his ayat, I think so, but you can double check where it talks about ثم استوى إلى السماء فسواهن سبع سماوات. I think he says ثم could mean like and. But moving to you now.
ثم أتينا موسى الكتاب لعلنا. And did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveal the book of Musa after the revelation to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Of course not.
That's
so here
example.
is a common example where they say thumma means wow.
Excellent. Moving to you, is there any significance from what you've studied of 42 days or anything like that? Because here there are 2 days that were mentioned, 40 days. Which is the 40 days that the process takes place and the soul is breathed and whatnot, and 42 days more specifically something to do with the male or female. Is there anything that you studied?
So there is some research to suggest that around 7 weeks, 42 days, there's a hormone that's released which guides or helps to guide whether the fetus will become a male or a female. So it's strange that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned 42 days and this hormone is also released at 42 days. It's strange.
Yeah. So this whole thing, the point of the because we said before, like the Orientalists say that the bones came before the laham. It doesn't necessitate that, because actually it could be happening all at the same time. Just like
there's nothing in the Islamic discourse to deny that.
Yeah.
Especially if we say what we mentioned before, that the Sunnah interprets the Quran. So therefore we know that in the Sunnah, in the hadith of this hadith of Sahih Muslim from hadith Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, it happens at the same time within the 40 days. The hadith of Hudayfa within 42 days. So therefore we could say that the ayat in question here, it could all be happening within 40 days, and there's nothing to deny this.
Oh, okay.
And it's in accordance to the Arabic language, and it's according to what we have from the Sunnah as well.
You know, one thing we've come to realize here, to be frank, there's a couple of other things that reference kind of embryonic development in the Quran. What about ظلمات ثلاث in Surah Al-Zumar?
ظلمات ثلاث. Now you have some of the Mufassirun. In fact, I have not come across
Can you
someone.
translate as well,
3 layers of darkness.
Yeah.
3 layers of darkness. Now I've not seen a difference of opinion that negates what I'm about to say, which is that they generally refer to it as the first darkness being the darkness of the womb or the uterus, and the second darkness being the darkness of the placenta, and the third darkness being the darkness of the stomach.
Okay. So it's talk about physical darkness rather than time.
Physical darkness.
Okay, that's quite interesting as well. Now the thing is,
this is the vast majority. That's not to say that there might not be some who have said that it refers to time.
I would say of all the things that we've covered in terms of like naturalistic phenomena as described per the Quranic discourse, this probably, I don't know, I mean I want your opinions on this as well, but for me, if there's anything I would use as a supplementary discussion of interest, I wouldn't say this is an evidence or a qat'i evidence or a certain truth, but as a supplementary discussion of interest with, say, a non-Muslim or something, it would be this. Of all the things that we've discussed so far, because it does seem quite precise, and there is an interesting correlation. You have to be honest with ourselves here, with the Quranic discourse and the 21st century scientific discourse, which isn't found in other ancient religious texts, and not even found, and this is going to be an even bigger claim and a very heavy one actually, not even found in philosophical and or scientific ancient texts. Is this a big statement to make?
It's big if you don't think Islam is the haqq. But for us, like obviously we believe it. Exactly as you said, it seems like there's a very interesting correlation, which would be, you'd be hard pressed to explain why that correlation exists if it wasn't the haqq.
What about those who say that Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam took it from Al-Harith ibn Kalda? who was known as Tabib al-Arab. He was known as the doctor of the Arabs. And they say that he was someone who was quite learned and travelled many lands, and he came across many cultures and many theories. And some claim this. How would you respond to that?
Wallahi, I think, once again, if we watch Zakir Naik's, let's watch Zakir Naik's, let's pause for a second, get Zakir Naik's explanation of this, because I think, and I do remember when I was some very young age, maybe not that young, but I watched this debate, and he had a brilliant explanation. So let's watch what he has to say about this.
The point to be noted, just because someone says some things which are matching with the Quran, that doesn't mean that Quran has been copied from that. Suppose I make a statement, if I make a statement which is correct, which was said by somebody else earlier, that doesn't mean I've copied. It may be, it may not be. To use the conflict approach with the Quran, yes, he copied. Okay, fine. But let's analyze. The Quran doesn't take the things which were wrong from Hippocrates. If you would have copied, you would have copied everything. It is logical. Unless he's a scientist, okay, this is correct. Oh, this is wrong. I won't copy that. This is correct. I'll copy that.
So as you saw there, guys, what he was saying was absolutely, I think this is a very strong argument that he makes. He's saying basically that how could it be the case? First and foremost, he's trying to copy now. He's plagiarizing. He has to go into great lengths to find now the correct scientific discourse. So selective copying.
Which would just so happen be most in line with modern scientific.
Yeah, it would just so happen. So he wouldn't choose from Aristotle, this, Pliny the Elder, whatever. He has to go to Galen. And not only does he have to go to Galen, but he has to take from Galen those things which are necessarily in line with the scientific discourse of the 21st century. Galen doesn't mention halakha, which is really he pointed out, Galen doesn't mention halakha, which is one of the main things of the Quranic discourse. Galen doesn't mention the 42 days and these things and the 40 days, and he doesn't mention the same things as the Quran mentions anyways. He doesn't. Some of the things are in line, some of the things, there are some continuities there, there is some overlap there, but frankly, for me, if I was an academic truth seeker, this wouldn't satiate my curiosity. It really wouldn't. I feel as if
it does no service to the claim.
It does a real disservice to their claim, and for them to have to make this claim is incredibly telling, actually.
Yeah, possibly. Hold on.
For them to make this claim is incredibly telling, because why do you think that a man in the think about this with our minds really for a second. A man in the desert. He's claiming to be a prophet. Now his main concerns is political, economic, social.
That's according to them.
Well, I mean, it would be if he's trying to unite people and, military conquest and all these things. Now he's putting forward a book. His intentionality here, according to this theory, is to preserve it for people of a different generation, so as to make it so as to make it scientifically coherent. He could have just said anything of what the Arabs believed in at that time, and it wouldn't have made any difference to his immediate mission.
You could even add to what you're saying, and that according to them, the theory is that he's a political activist. He's trying to unite the Arab tribes, trying to make like an empire, sort of. Yeah. What business does he have talking about an embryo? Science. What business does he have mentioning these things in the first place? And even if you did mention them, if he mentioned them and someone had at the time said, no, you're wrong in this, because we don't have any evidence that the Prophet ﷺ was ever learned in these things. If he had been caught out, it would have discredited his whole claim right from the beginning. Right. So why make such a big risk? If you're looking at it from an outside perspective, looking at it, why make this claim, or why make these statements in the first place?
Yeah, why go completely out of line with what the Arab of the 7th century will understand intuitively? This is the point. Why doesn't he? Sometimes there are certain things, certain words, which the Arab uses generally in that 7th century context. So why doesn't he just stick to those words? So he's using words which can be understood, but which can also be interpreted in our times. It seems a little bit contrived from their angle now. To be honest with you, from their angle, it seems like they're struggling with this one.
Absolutely.
I think they're struggling with this one because there is an interesting twist to this one. But frankly, I think this is the power of the Islamic discourse. I think that the timeless nature of the Quran and the timeless to use Hamza Zulz's phrase, multi-layered, multi-dimensional approach. It really is a multi-layered, multi-dimensional reality, because look at it. It made sense. It was perfect for them. They understood it. It was something a little bit what they were not used to, the wording, but they understood generally what it meant, and it makes perfect sense for us today. So we can appreciate it. And it's completely out of line with the biblical discourse, which is completely out of line with the with modern 21st century discourse.
There's actually an interesting book written. A certain academic has written. I believe he's from Oxford, but don't quote me on that. His name is Bassam Sa'ih, and he's written an interesting book where he's compiled all of the old Arabic poetry, pre-Islamic poetry, and compared the kind of language that's used in that against the Quran, and tabulated it all basically, and written like some small books and small treatises on it. And he's done it on the Fatiha. He's gone into quite a lot of detail in the Fatiha, and he's basically showing that even in the Fatiha, the way that the sentences are structured, the way that the words that are used, it's not what the Arabs were used to at that time. It's completely new and different to the way the Arabs at that time would have phrased it, and what the pre-Islamic poetry, the way that it was constructed. So it raises a lot of questions. It raises a lot of questions.
And with that, I hope we've been able to give you a lot of answers, guys, because this and the point of this discussion here, and why I brought all these people with different areas of expertise, is to give you a new academic approach. And I think this is really, subhanAllah, I really do believe what we're talking about here is really, not to use a big term, but could revolutionize the way we think about these things altogether. So it's for you guys to really start thinking critically about these things, be completely academic, honest with ourselves. We don't want to say about what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that which He doesn't intend in the Quran. At the same time, we're not saying that science is a bad thing or anything like that. So in the next episode, we are going to talk about some other miscellaneous scientific miracles claims, and we're going to go through whether or not they are valid according to the exegesis, just as we did with the embryology session today. I hope you've had a good session. Make sure to subscribe to everyone's page. You've got a page as well, don't you? So I'll put in the descriptions the social medias for these guys on my right and left. Inshallah, I'll put their name and the stuff that they're kind of doing on social media. Make sure to subscribe to their channels for more information. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.